Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about giving and preparing for an effective 1AR. My name is Genevieve Hackman. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Kentucky, and I put together this lecture because I think the 1AR is a really crucial turning point in any given debate. It's time pressed, it's your first opportunity to respond to a lot of the nuance that will occur in the negative block, and it's crucial to set your 2AR for success. Before the tournament, there's a number of things you can do to prepare for the 1AR. The most important thing you can be doing as a 1A is communicating with your 2A. The 2A will be making strategic decisions about the arguments that you're going to make against certain off-case positions. They will know the affirmative best, and they will be the ones to direct the choices you make in affirmative debates. Talking to your 2A about those choices and knowing that you two are on the same page ahead of time will allow you to have short and easy conversations during the debate because you've already established this basis for what you're thinking about how the 1AR is going to go and how it's going to set the 2AR up. However, in order to have effective communication with your 2A, you still need to be preparing. It's really important that even as a 1A, you still are very comfortable and knowledgeable about the affirmative, that you know your 1AC exceptionally well, and that you're able to understand the strategic choices that your 2A is making during time-pressed preparation. The second tip I have for preparing before the tournament is preparing 1AR blocks. 1AR blocks should be used sparingly, and they are often more of a starting point than they are an ending point. But having 1AR blocks is a useful thing to have to give yourself a bouncing off point during a debate. The key to a good 1AR block is keeping it as succinct as possible because you absolutely will have to add things to make sure that it's coherent and applicable during the debate. Having 1AR cards that designate 1AR blocks that designate cards that are best to read to answer specific link arguments and are very specific will be the best blocks. When your blocks are specific in this manner, you can pick and choose which blocks to use and read in a debate based off of what the negative has said, which is the best way to ensure that you're not relying too heavily on pre-written arguments that don't apply to the articulation of a specific argument that the negative has made in this debate. I have an example 1AR block that I'm going to talk you through. So this is the 2AC card I've selected. In this imaginary debate, the 1AC was the drug treatment of, and we're talking about the state's counterplan. So your 2A reads this card in the 2AC, and I'll give you a second to kind of skim through this card. I highly encourage you to pause at this point and to write what you think would be a good 1AR extension of this evidence. So write a quick extension of the evidence that includes the warrants that are in the card, and then pick and choose 1 to 3 cards that you think could be paired with that extension in a debate in any 1AR against the state's counterplan. Assuming that you have paused and kind of gone through and done this yourself, now we can talk about the example that I've written. So labels are very important. I often organize my 1AR block file by off-case position, similar to how a 2AC would organize theirs. And then I put kind of specifically the argument that's being made, the 1AR state's counterplan solvency. I might even include the author name in that tag if I had a bunch of different state's counterplan solvency cards that would be read on different occasions. In this 1AR block, I include a short extension of the card. I start with kind of a tagline, what am I saying? The counterplan can't solve. Then I make sure to include important warrants from the prior evidence. The warrants that I identified were the federal government is going to continue to prosecute offenders in federal court. Especially, they're going to target particular states that do lenient policies, which means states that would do the affirmative. Then I end with the author, and then in a debate where I was actually going to read this 1AR block, the next step I would have is answering the arguments that the negative has made. So in between where I've got my extension and where I've got the next card that I would read, I would insert some lines about what the negative has said, indicting the negative evidence, comparing the warrants of the negative evidence to the 2AC card, and potentially doing something like comparing the qualifications of our card to the qualifications of their card. That is the most important step in any 1AR block, because if you were to just read this kind of pre-written canned thing that I've got here, your 1AR is not going to be able to get to the depth of argumentation necessary to effectively respond to what the negative block has said. It's obvious to any judge when you're reading pre-written blocks that haven't been adapted for the debate. It makes you look bad, it makes your arguments shallow and not responsive, and it does not effectively set up your 2A for a winning debate. Next, I've included a piece of evidence. This is another piece of evidence that I think has a thematically similar argument that could be paired kind of with the above extension and paired kind of with that 2AC card. I think that this card kind of matched up with the extension in my mind because it's thematically saying the same thing. It's talking about how federal prosecutors will selectively prosecute things, but it makes an argument about the impact of that. It says that when they do that, that kind of maximizes the impact of federal law. It makes a new claim that there's empirical work to support this, and then it makes a specific claim about how we know that federal prosecutors target high-profile cases. So this new evidence is thematically similar, but it has new supporting warrants to diversify what the 2AC has said. That's the really important part of selecting this 1AR evidence, is you don't want to just read evidence for reading evidence sake. You want to read evidence that improves the warrants and the extensions that can be carried into the 2AR. The last thing I would say about preparing ahead of time is that you want to be communicating with your 2A in between every tournament, in between every debate. You want to talk about things that have gone wrong, what judges have said that you could improve, the things that have gone right. What is the stuff that your 2A really likes that you're doing? What is the stuff you really like that your 2A is helping you do to set up an effective 1AR? And what do you necessarily need to change in order to more effectively address off-case positions that maybe you're losing to more often? So during the debate, the 1A has a number of roles. While you have prep time, that should be targeted towards supporting your 2A. So it's really important to start by kind of asking your 2A anything they need, making sure that you are addressing if they need help with 2AC blocks or scouting efforts to figure out what the team might read, or any kind of general thing your 2A might need from you to help them feel more prepared for the debate. Generally, if your 2A is like, no, I'm good, I've got it, you also want to make sure you're familiarizing yourself with, like, what does this team usually say? What do they go for often? So, you know, there might be positions that they read in the 1NC all the time, but that they never end up going for. And you kind of want to be aware of that so that you know when you're preparing your 1AR what to prioritize. Then I would go ahead and compile the 1AR blocks on the common positions the team goes for. So you might notice this team always reads states, federalism, the neolib-K, and another dissent. I would get my 1AR blocks together for kind of all of those positions, and I would put them in a file that kind of gives me a starting point for the 1AR in this debate. So because it's generally easier to delete stuff from a file that you don't need than it is to go find and kind of copy new stuff in. Once the debate has started, it's your job to be paying a lot of attention to the specifics of what's going on in the negative so that your partner has the opportunity to carefully prep their 2AC and pay attention to the big picture. So one example of this is during the 1NC. During the 1NC, you should be doing a close read of the 1NC evidence, particularly if there's a new position that you don't have familiarity with, figuring out what the flaws with that position are, and talking to your 2A about preparing that 2AC block. While reading that evidence closely, you want to take notes of things that are worth bringing up in the cross-ex. You might want to take notes of things that are worth saying in the 2AC and flag them for your 2A. And then you want to think about the big picture. What is the 1NC spending a lot of time on? Did they read 6 cards on the elections dissad and a 1-card critique? Obviously, in that situation, it seems much more likely that they want to go for the elections dissad than they do this underdeveloped K argument. Obviously, that's not a reason to completely blow off or not cover the critique, but it might allow you to think strategically about aiding your 2A in making decisions about time allocation. What are the net benefits to the counterplans that they are reading? Do those net benefits make sense? Do they logically not link to the counterplan? Is there something strategic you can say about how the counterplans interact with those disadvantages? And what do those net benefits mean for negative strategy? If a dissad is a net benefit to a bunch of different counterplans, it's more likely that the negative is going to want to extend that, given the strategic flexibility it has. The last thing I think about kind of during the 1NC is there something you need to cut cards about? Is there a position that you know from your familiarity with the affirmative that you are just not ready for? Is there a new dissad, something about current events where kind of doing a quick Google search to kind of see what's going on in that situation and cutting a couple of cards would be advantageous. You can communicate with your 2A about this so that you can support your 2A effectively during that process. Then you kind of have to do your 1NC cross-ex, targeting the off-case positions with questions that you've prepared based on your close reading of the 1NC. During the 2AC, there are a couple of roles you can play. The single most important thing to do is flow and be ready to extend your 2AC evidence. You should be able to kind of keep up with what the 2AC is saying and know what all of the 2AC evidence is saying and kind of what the warrants of it are, so that later in the debate, when you have to extend that evidence, you're not like, oh, I've never read that card before. You really want to kind of keep an eye on what the 2AC evidence is saying and what arguments you've got on any given page. Flowing is the most important way to do that. Skimming the evidence as your 2A is reading it, and having familiarity ahead of time that you can kind of keep track of. The smaller but still important things that you can do are keep an eye on your 2A's time management. You should consider developing some sort of incognito way to prompt your 2A to move on. Some ways might be like a physical signal. I would just kind of like pick my hand up until it kind of got into the line of sight of my 2A. And that usually kind of caught their attention to kind of show them to move on. So figuring out kind of like the best way to aid your 2A in this manner without being disruptive of the 2AC and trying to interrupt them or talk over them. You could bring up a piece of paper that's like, move on, get on with it, like spend more time on something else. All of those things kind of help your 2A watch their time management. The second thing you can do is watch the other team. Is there a position that they literally don't flow? Like, is there a point in the debate when your 2A is like answering an argument and they are just like totally not paying attention? That might be kind of something you can look out for so that you know what the likely kind of things that are coming into the block might be. During the negative block, once again, the most important thing to do is flow. You should know what the negative is saying on every position. You should be keeping track of their arguments, knowing what evidence they are reading, and having a general idea of what is happening in this debate. Flowing is just so important to keep track of all of the things that are being said by one side, so that when you get to prep time, you don't have to try and rely on your memory to remember what happened in the negative block, because you get so much information thrown at you at once that even if you're like, it's fine, it's only 2 minutes from now, you might forget a specific warrant or which specific card they read. So flowing is really, really important. In the back of your mind while you're flowing, you should do a couple of things. First, you should keep an eye out for must answers. I circle these on my flow. These are things that if you drop them in the 1AR, you're in a really bad position. Some examples of this, turns case arguments. On the critique, they might be K-tricks, like fiat isn't real. On a critique, it might be something like an alt solves the case argument, where if you didn't answer that, you'd be in a really bad position. So thinking about kind of like these must answers that if you dropped you would walk out of your 1AR being like, oh God, like we're really behind. What are we gonna do? You should also be thinking about splitting the burden with your 2A. An example of this that I like to talk about is if the negative is like extending the politics dissad and you think that the best argument against the politics dissad is the dissad won't pass or one candidate will win versus the other. Not saying that that is the best argument, but maybe that's like what you think. Ask your 2A to do a close read of the evidence they read. They can recut that evidence, indict that evidence, help you write kind of that chunk of your extension where they are doing the comparative work. When you split the burden like that, it allows you to kind of get all of the necessary stuff done for the 1AR, but your 2A can kind of make sure that they have the level of specificity that's necessary to have a successful extension of an important argument. You also want to be thinking about where you're ahead and where you're behind. What arguments do you think you've got really good cards on and you really don't think the neg is up to par? What arguments are you very worried about based on how they've extended them and other things like that? That's going to help you inform the strategic choices that you are going to make during the 1AR. Next, you also want to make sure, as a rule of thumb, that once the negative block gets to case, you are writing your answers. I think that this is the best way to kind of do the case debate, is just like while they are going through the case in the block, you are kind of writing the quick like 3 or 4 words on your flow next to each argument that will remind you of what you need to say in the 1AR. I think if you do it this way, then you'll be done with the case debate before prep happens, and that kind of gives you prep time to focus on the off-case positions, which you might be less experienced talking about or have less of an idea of kind of what the important arguments the evidence says are, versus the case debate, which you can kind of do very easily with very few kind of warrants written down and with less preparation, because you're very familiar with what your case says, and you might be familiar with the common negative cards and arguments read against your case. So the next step is 1AR preparation. The first thing you should do, if this already hasn't happened, is think about what you absolutely have to get done. Part of this is consultation with your 2A to make sure you're on the same page about priorities. This should just be a general idea in your mind of what arguments you still need to work on, what cards you need to put in your document, and kind of what stuff you have done. So make sure you kind of have an idea of this so that you can effectively utilize 1AR prep and utilize your 2A during 1AR prep. As I said about the case arguments, if those are all just defense, you should be done with them by now. If you have kind of paid attention and flowed in the block, that'll kind of be the easiest thing to get done. Then you want to make sure that you are making your pre-writtens more specific. So any 1AR blocks you have, you want to make sure that they are more specific based on what the negative block has said. Generally, I think of the 1AR prep as kind of finishing things up and then consultation time with your 2A. A big chunk of preparation for what you're going to say in the 1AR is stuff that you've said and thought about ahead of time, stuff that you've talked to your 2A about ahead of time, and stuff you have thought about and organized during the block. This is kind of a skill that you will acquire over time. Earlier in your debate career, you'll have to take more 1AR prep time to be able to talk to your 2A more and kind of organize things outside of the craziness of the block happening while you're trying to make these decisions. And then as you get kind of more familiar with the process of preparing the 1AR, this will get easier. And that's a reason why I think it's really, really important to have 1AR redos, lots of practice debates, lots of practice speeches in the 1AR, so that you can do this process over and over and over again to get that kind of repetitive practice that'll give you the efficiency that might make you feel more comfortable. A lot of what kind of goes into 1AR prep is very related to the things that are happening in the 1AR. So I'm going to talk about kind of how to give the 1AR and the specifics of what I'm thinking about when I'm giving the 1AR. And that'll kind of shape what you think about when you are thinking about your preparation. So I broadly split giving the 1AR into the case debate and the off-case debate. So always don't forget your offense always goes first. So the case debate always comes first. Then you want to order the off-case debates in a similar order to the 2AC. Topicality is kind of the most important thing you would want to do right after the case. Then you want to do things that can capture off offense, so counterplans or critiques. And then you want to kind of get to disadvantages. And that's the kind of general framework you should be thinking about organizing the structure of the 1AR in. Organized case debate and efficient case debate is one of the best things you can do for yourself as a 1A, because the more efficient and organized you are with the case debate, the kind of more time you have to think about and focus on the off-case positions, which you might be less experienced in talking about. You want to be very, so you want to do very careful line by line on the case. I do not recommend doing a case overview unless there's a dropped argument. So if they've dropped an impact, so let's say your 1AC has an econ impact, a warming impact, and an AI impact, and they've dropped the warming impact, but they've read defense, the other stuff. You might want to do a quick one-liner at the top of your 1AR on that page that says, they dropped the warming impact, warming caused extinction, kind of do an extension of your evidence, and make sure you're flagging that it's dropped. The other thing is if there's a major framing issue that you think is really important. So they've dropped all of our internal links, which means if we win a risk of an impact, our internal links are the largest kind of connecting issue to that impact. Just anything you think of that relates the case to how the rest of the debate is happening, so that you are only kind of doing these overviews if there is a really important issue that you want to flag for the judge. Otherwise, don't do an overview. You're going to do it on the line by line. If you are doing line by line and truly answering every argument that the negative has made on case, then you are going to address all of the necessary components of the affirmative. When you're doing that line by line, you really, really, really want to practice being efficient. This is something you can practice doing by giving case redos for that portion of the 1AR. But you also need to make sure you include a warrant or two when you're kind of doing those efficient explanations, so that when the 2AR can wax poetic about the case, they are not giving new arguments. The last thing to think about with the case is know when you need to kick an advantage. This is a strategic choice that can give you a lot more time back in the 1AR if necessary, but it's something you want to think about in relation to what's going on in the rest of the debate. Is that advantage your best solvency deficit to a counterplan they are definitely going for? Then you probably don't want to kick it. Have they dropped an impact on the advantage and you think the rest of their arguments are blah, and you think that this advantage could be a strategic impact or internal link argument against a disad, then you probably don't want to kick it. Is the advantage covered super, super well? The negative has a bunch of new cards, a bunch of really specific indicts. They might just be on the truth side of the advantage. Then that might be a case when you want to kick that advantage and get the time back that you don't have to dedicate to kind of trying to parse through all of what the 2NC or 1NR has said. So kind of developing that instinct is going to be a good one to be able to figure out. So off-case positions are a little bit more complicated. First, make sure to think about time allocation. I think something that is easy to forget is just how short a 1AR is. You really do not get a lot of time once you've kind of already talked about the case debate. It might take you a minute or two to get through the case, then you've got only 3 minutes left to cover the rest of the block. So really thinking about what you have time to cover and what is the most important stuff to say. I think something you can practice doing before tournaments that can give you more of an idea of time allocation is think about hypothetical blocks that people might give. So a really common one might be the 2NC says states counterplanning case and the 1NR says elections. Assuming that it takes you 2 minutes to get through case, how much time are you going to spend on the states counterplan and how much time are you going to spend on elections in the remaining 3 minutes you have? Thinking about that ahead of time will get you kind of more familiar with keeping an eye on the clock and what's happening. The next thing that is really important in debating the off case in the 1AR is debating modularly. So what I mean about this is you want to pick and choose the most important arguments on the off case positions, and you want to consider those kind of their own module of arguments. So for example, let's say the negative has extended the elections dissad. Your 2AC might have said 5 or 6 arguments on the elections dissad. You're not going to have time to extend all of them and do it in a meaningful way where you are extending them, answering all of the nuance of the negative block, and reading new evidence if necessary. So you have to choose kind of like your priorities. So let's say you choose the impact defense, the link uniqueness argument, and the uniqueness argument. Let's say those are your 3 arguments that you're like, I really think a winning 2AR in this dissad involves these 3 arguments. So you want to think about each of these 3 arguments as their own module. So you've got your impact argument. Within your module of your impact argument, you want to extend your impact defense. You want to answer all of their impact articulation, any new arguments they've made about the impact. You want to answer new impacts they've made. And then you might want to read more impact defense if you think that that's a crucial part of the debate. Within that, you want to do kind of all of the necessary impact work, and then you have concluded that module. Then you kind of move on to your next module. Let's say that's uniqueness. So the negative has said that Biden is winning now. You want to extend your argument. Your uniqueness argument in this situation would be Trump is winning now. You want to extend your reasons why that's true, the warrants from the 2AC evidence. You want to do the comparison and answer the warrants of their evidence. This might be a place to reread their evidence or indict their authors or indict the thesis of their evidence, and then you would want to read new evidence. You want to address everything within the uniqueness module, and then you would move on. And that's kind of how you should think about organizing the 1AR off-case positions so that you are focusing in on the most important arguments. Keep in mind, outside of those modules, there might still be a couple of things to do, and those would be the must answers. So for example, if they've made a turns case argument, that's a must answer that you want to answer regardless. If they've said that Biden will do the AF, that's something you have to answer. So you must answer that one and kind of resolve that. If they say post-election, Trump would roll back the AF, that would be kind of a must answer. All of those you still want to kind of do your answers to. You still want to have your answer to that. It might be an analytic argument. It might be an extension of something from earlier. It might be reading a new card. But other than that, you really want to focus in on having these modules in the 1AR so that you are picking and choosing the most important arguments. I guarantee you, for the rest of your debate career as a 1A, you will hear the comment that you need to pick and choose your arguments so that you are not spreading yourself too thin in basically every decision for the rest of your 1A career. So getting good at it early is going to really, really, really help you. That is kind of the biggest, most important thing I think you should keep in mind when you're talking about the 1AR. So all of that should really prepare you to be an effective 1A. I know that was a lot, so make sure that you are kind of thinking about processing the parts of this lecture that are most important and practicing the things that I gave you to practice. So thank you all for coming and watching the lecture, and I hope that this helps you have more successful 1ARs in the future.